Okay, I just want to start off by saying that this video is heavily inspired by one of my most favorite creators, Johnny Harris. He has a similar video on it and I'll link it down below. And just like Mr. Harris, I too am obsessed with maps. Right here, this one of the British Isles. However, the same question came to me before watching his video, and it's, why are maps made like this? Like, why are they framed like this? Huh? Why are they framed like this? Why? And that was one of the questions that I wanted to figure out. I mean, look at the maps. They both have them. And come to think of it, every single map I've seen since I was a child has one of these. And that's the 0 point, always running through the same place. The 0 point, you see, it runs straight through right there. I can't believe I never noticed this before. But why specifically here? Why? Why not anywhere else? All right, let's take a step back for a minute. The Earth itself is divided into lines, and some of them are curved, like you can see on the map here. And whether they're straight or not depends on a thing called projection. Now, I won't go into the video right now, but what you need to know is that we've got these latitude and longitude lines that run up and down and side to side. Each one of these lines has a number assigned to it, right? And for the up and down lines, there's a 0 point to kick things off. Now, if you go right to the 0 point, or east of it, as we like to say, the number is going to start climbing up from 0 up to 180, with the little E to indicate that you're east of the 0 line. And if you head to the left of the 0 point, or west, you will get the same deal. 0 down to 180, but this time with a W. But that center point we were talking about earlier, yeah? The 0 point, which we all measure east and west of things. It's the same deal for those side-to-side lines. You know, if you head north, you're gonna keep climbing till you hit 180 degrees north, and if you head south, you'll hit 180 degrees south, which is the South Pole, right? Pretty simplistic. But how do we figure out where to put the 0 point? So how do we figure out the 0 point for the vertical lines, right? Look at the vertical line. I mean, okay, we can figure out the 0 point for the horizontal lines. It's pretty simple. The Earth's got two natural poles, so we'll give the natural top and bottom, right? You know, we've got halfway between those poles, boom, you've got the equator, which makes for a natural 0 point, which you can measure everything from. Now, those up and down lines, the vertical lines, it's pretty much arbitrary. You can put them wherever you like, really. Just because this map has it like this doesn't mean it's correct. You could put it anywhere and it could technically also be correct, but why do we measure it like this? Now, who's to say that Russia can't be a 0 point, or Japan? In fact, back in the day, that's how it used to be. You know, folks would pick their home base as a capital or a 0 point and measure everything else from there. These maps were crucial for navigation, and everyone had a 0 point. Now, nowadays, it's a bit more civilized, you know, but back then, countries were fighting wars and competing each other left and right, you know? But let me take you back to the 1800s, a pivotal time in history when everything was changing. You know, countries and empires were no longer just competing and fighting with each other, but rather they started to align and trade with each other. This, coupled with the rise of map making and sea navigation as a booming industry, meant that now there's a demand for good seafaring maps. And as map making was trending, it was a pretty exciting time to be alive. But there was also one more thing that happened during this time that was also crucial, and that was trains. Trains were popping up everywhere and revolutionizing travel. No longer were people confined to just traveling on horseback. They could now travel across an entire country and a whole system of trains. But trains run on schedules and timetables which require a universal set time. And that was the problem. There was no universal set time back in the 1800s. Just take a look at the piece of paper from the United States, for example. You know, these cities back then, all of them would have been Eastern Standard Time, but back then they would have had their own local time. And this made train travel really confusing and really difficult. It was clear that something needed to be done to standardize the time. And this is where the idea of time zones came in. It was decided that Earth itself would be divided up essentially into 24 equal time zones, each 1 hour apart. And that's how we ended up with the time zones that we have today. So the next time you catch a train or look at a map, just remember that there's a fascinating history behind all of it. So back in the late 1800s, time was a total mess. Everyone had their own time depending on when was noon for them. It was a real nightmare for trains which relied on schedules and timetables to keep themselves running efficiently. But then this US president that no one really remembers saw the problem and decided to do something about it. He invited 41 countries to Washington, D.C. to figure out where the 0 point of the world should be so that every map and every clock could be normalized to the same spot. And after some white dudes sitting around in a room, they decided that the prime meridian, or the 0 point, should go to a little town called Greenwich in England. Almost everyone agreed, except for the Dominican Republic and France, and Brazil kind of abstained diplomatically. But eventually France got on board and made their maps with Greenwich as the center point. And that's how we got this one time zone that we all have. So why is Greenwich in London the center point of the world? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to 1884. Back in 1884, the British Empire was actually one of the strongest militaries and navy in the world. So it made sense from a navigational point of view for them to be in charge of where they put it. Now, thanks to advancements in technology over time, the actual center point itself has changed a little bit. But the tradition of using Greenwich as a medium for the east and west divide has remained. In fact, it was also stated that at noon at the Royal Observatory should be a measure for the entire world. And that's why they call it Greenwich Mean Time, or in other words, GMT. If you take a look at this map, you'll see that Greenwich, England is right smack in the middle, and that's where GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, is. And as you move west of Greenwich, you start getting GMT -1 or GMT -2, -3, and so on. And if you go east or forward in time, you get +1, +2, +3 GMT. So let's say it's noon at Greenwich, and the next time zone would be 1 p.m. and so on. And if you keep going 12 time zones away from Greenwich, you'll get up to the international date line. And this is where GMT +12 or -12 ends up, and where the new day starts. Okay, so let's use this as an example. Let's say it's 4 p.m. on May 28th at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. But if you head across the ocean to Washington, D.C., it's 11 a.m. on the same day. And if you head further west to Seattle or Portland, it's 8 a.m. But if you keep going west into the Pacific, you'll eventually hit French Polynesia, where it's 5 a.m. And now you're in GMT -11. And if you keep going until you hit the Baker Islands, you'll be at 4 a.m. on the same day. So it's 4 a.m. and it's Random Island in the Pacific, right? But check this out. Once you cross this messy looking line, it's still 4 a.m. But now it's the next day. It's May 29th, 4 a.m. here in Fiji. At the same time, It's 4 p.m. in Greenwich. It's now 4 a.m. the next day, May 29th, 12 hours in front of Greenwich, just by going over this international date line. And you can do the exact same thing going the other way. Start heading east, and then you'll see that it's 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m., head all the way over into Asia, and then you're getting closer to that 4 a.m. mark, and you'll see now what happens when you get over to Fiji. The caveat to all of this is, of course, that some of these countries switch by an hour for these things like daylight savings or whatever, but ignore that for now. Just imagine it wasn't daylight savings right now. And in this moment, we are in daylight savings, at least in the United Kingdom, and this holds the same across the world. But the point of all of this is to say that because of a conference in 1884 to reconcile train timetables and make them all uniform, we now have a mapping and navigation system that is uniform and standard. And Britain is just sitting in the middle of it. Now, obviously the British Empire may have fallen and people have gotten over from Britain being the center of the world, but from a navigational and mapping point of view, Britain still is technically the center of the world.